Alrighty, let's go ahead and begin with me being tired. And I don't mean that just because there's 18 hours left on that timer and, well, I don't really have an end in sight, all things considered. No, 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 no. I mean that because despite the amount of times that I would like to stop talking about Marjorie Taylor Greene and the things she does in and around my district that affects people in and outside my district, she keeps doing things until she gets taken out of politics. And even then, she'll still be doing things because she's already got her notoriety and her little TV show that she is working on. Well, not really TV, but you get the point. We have three here, all from the same person this time. It is from a user named Tisilla. Said, I was watching a video about biblical gender roles, feeling a little funny dead because BGR, saw a wonderful summoning circle on Suris and thought, a thought bubbled up, and I had to draw out the idea for this very early spooky concept. I present the three genders of skeleton necromancer Suris. Male, female, and small undead shadow skeleton kitty. First of all, Tylo, thank you for redeeming your points for an Ada. Fucking degen. But let's go ahead and take a look here. We've got the very first one. The next one is the femme version, and then the small slime version. Honestly, they look fantastic. As always, everybody, if you want your fan art to be shown in a future video, the best way to do so is to drop it into the fan art section, as always. And thank you, every single person who does throw anything into the fan art section. I'm still flabbergasted that we get fan art in there at all things considered, because it's just awesome. That said, if you enjoy the content you're about to see, maybe consider hitting the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, maybe even check out the Patreon. Those are all things that can help the channel out, and I would highly recommend y'all do at least a few of those. With that said, let's get into the story itself. So this comes to us from The Hill. Marjorie Taylor Greene introduces a bill to make gender-affirming care for transgender youth a felony. Now, despite the breadth of data we have that shows that a lot of kids actually understand that their gender is not exactly fixed in place earlier on than we originally thought, despite data showing that we start to understand if something's not right, if you're trans, you start to feel that something in your body's not quite operating the way it should be earlier and earlier and earlier. Well, at least data is showing that we're realizing that it happens earlier and earlier and earlier. Like 5 or 6 is we're seeing is when sometimes there can be a bit of an issue when you start saying, hey, this thing is for a boy, and they go, okay, and I'm one of those, right? But why do I not want the boy things? It can happen, but let's go ahead and take a look and see what's going on with this story. So, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene introduced a bill on Friday, so today, that would make providing gender-affirming medical care to transgender minors a felony, punishable by up to 25 years in prison. Now, gender-affirming care, in this case, can also just mean puberty blockers. Let's take a look here. Greene's Protect the Children's Innocent Act outlaws more than a dozen medical interventions and procedures used to treat gender dysphoria in transgender young people, including puberty blockers, hormone therapy, and certain kinds of surgeries done for the purpose of changing the body of such individual to correspond with a sex that differs from their biological sex. The measure would also prohibit using federal funds for gender-affirming healthcare, including in the Affordable Health Care Act plans. When it comes to gender-affirming care, which is really child abuse, this is actually an assault and it's child abuse, said Greene when she was talking with Tucker Carlson. Now, let's go ahead and get a couple things clear. Gender-affirming care lowers the suicidality rates of trans youth. This is an pretty much indisputed fact. Now, that is an indisputed fact in a vacuum. The problem is that it doesn't always happen in a vacuum. So what happens is your rate of let's say that there's a 20% chance of suicide because of you having to operate in a body that you are not comfortable with, and that just grates on you day in, day out, and it's horrible. What we have found is that societal pressure can create all of those exact same problems. So when people say, well, actually, gender-affirming care doesn't really change anything, it doesn't really do that, maybe note that when they say stuff like that, they are actively being a part of what creates the other problem. Because again, gender-affirming care doesn't exist in a vacuum. It also includes societal care, how people in society generally treat them. Not just friends and family, though that is probably the most important thing, but people out on the street. And if somebody wants to go, well, it's my right to treat them however, shut the fuck up. No, seriously, actually. No. We're not going into this nuanced territory today. No, actually shut the fuck up. Take a moment, pull back, shut your mouth, and let's talk about why you should shut your mouth. And by let's, I mean me, because you need to shut the fuck up. These are the exact same things people have said about they should be allowed to be racist, they should be allowed to be anti-Semitic, they should be allowed to be homophobic, they should be allowed to be all of these things in public around other people and make their lives worse. The reasoning that is given is almost always some kind of, well, if they're allowed to make me uncomfortable, I'm allowed to make them uncomfortable. This is America, it's a free nation, woo. Now that we've gotten that little bit out of the way, let's proceed back to the shutting the fuck up stage of this conversation. And in this shutting the fuck up stage of this conversation, I'm going to lay out that, congratulations, all you're doing is saying that somebody existing differently than you upsets you. Existing, not doing anything at all whatsoever. Merely existing is enough to get you upset enough to contribute to a suicide statistic. That's what you're saying. And that might not be what you mean. That might not be how it sounds in your head, but that's how it is in reality. And I would implore you, if your options are do something stupid and bigoted and transphobic, which, by the way, you might not even realize some of the shit you're doing is that. Nobody who is a bigot thinks of themselves as a bigot, generally speaking. Nobody's the villain of their own story. But the reality of the situation is, you should ask the people around you, hey, is what I'm doing hurting you? And if so, how and why? How is it hurting you, and in what way? And yes, before you get out of this sitting down and shutting the fuck up stage, there are people who are very militant in their identity and can make things incredibly uncomfortable in that conversation and can make life pretty unbearable for you and make it to where you don't want to support them. You literally have a backfire effect. I understand that. I also understand that those types of people are very much a vocal minority of an already oppressed minority group. They are not an excuse to be a dick to the people who are not causing you problems. So, there's that. That is a thing that has been stuck in my head because of conversations I have been having IRL and elsewhere. So I need to go ahead and get that out. Because it seems like it should be pretty fecking obvious, but apparently it's not. Now let's go back to the Marjorie Taylor Greene stuff. The reason that I even went on that tangent in the first place is when somebody calls gender-affirming care child abuse, despite the breadth of data we have that shows that it has a positive effect on children, and the rate of people who end up detransitioning is very, very low, to be against things even as small as puberty blockers doesn't make any sense to me. Even if you were to take the stance that being transgender is purely a medical thing, I'm not a trans medicalist, but let's put our bootsies in those shoes for a little bit. Let's put our feet in those waters. Let's try to understand from that side of things. If you believe that being trans is purely a medical issue, then you accept the fact that gender-affirming care is medical intervention. And if things like puberty blockers are medical intervention when we're talking about cancer patients to lower their risk of chance of dying and increase their risk or increase their chance of survival, then you should accept that it's the exact same way with dysphoria, because it's a killer, not any different. It just happens to manifest in a way that you're less comfortable with. It's invisible. If I say there's a cancer or a tumor growing on someone, you can identify that and say that needs to be removed. But if I say that there's a mental health issue of any kind, it's usually pretty easy for someone to dismiss that. And that shouldn't be the case. But for people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, there's only one of two options. Either the abuse is the point, or she truly believes that she's on the righteous path of God. One of the two. But let's continue. She then says, this practice should never happen. It's so disgusting and appalling. This needs to be illegal. Don't you like it when uneducated politicians are in charge of what medical care can be given to people? Don't you love when uneducated people, unelected people, mind, in this case, when we're talking about Marjorie, when those people are the ones who get to have a primary say in whether or not a doctor can do their job? Isn't that just swell? Don't you love that little bit of bureaucracy? Isn't that just great? Under Greene's bill, anyone who knowingly performs any gender-affirming care on a minor is guilty of a Class C felony, carrying a punishment of 10 to 25 years in prison and a maximum fine of $250,000. The measure is similar to a first-of-its-kind Alabama law that was passed earlier this year that makes it a felony punishable by a decade in prison for doctors or others to assist transgender youth younger than 19 in accessing gender-affirming medical care, including puberty blockers and hormone therapy. A federal judge in May partially blocked state officials from enforcing the law, ruling that Alabama had not produced any credible evidence that gender-affirming care is experimental, and parents, not the states or the federal courts, play the primary role in caring for their children. Attorneys for the state sought to appeal the decision. Greene's bill would also prohibit institutions of higher education from performing any instruction on gender-affirming care and would bar doctors that have provided gender-affirming care to minors from receiving visas or being admitted into the United States. We have a very small amount of doctors in the United States, an increasingly small amount of doctors, one might say, proportional to the amount of people who need medical help. What Marjorie is proposing here is that people who know how to do their job and are doing their job should be taken out of the pool of medical providers, which means that this doesn't just affect trans people. No, person watching this video who goes, that sure does suck for the transes. I hope that it never happens to me. Bitch, I'm cis and it's already going to be a thing that happens to me. Bills like this going through make it harder and harder to be a medical professional. And the harder it is to be a medical professional, the fewer medical professionals there will be. That is just a matter of raw numbers. And the fewer medical professionals that there are, guess what? The less likely it is that you're going to be able to receive help. Did you know that my partner Raz does not have a primary care physician? Do you know how long she's been insured? We've been paying for her insurance for about 1.5 years. It'll be 2 years coming up decently soon. You want to know why there's not a service provider? Do you know why she doesn't have a primary care physician? Because every time they find somebody, they either rotate out of network at the last possible second, or alternatively, something comes up and, oh, we'll just have to push it a little bit more forward. Now, issues like this don't happen when doctors are able to spend more time per patient, but that can't happen if you don't have enough doctors in the pool to take care of patients, and by removing doctors from the pool that could take care of patients merely because they are performing gender-affirming care against a minority group you don't like, you are now taking this thing that affects trans people in a very negative way, and you are now making it affect everyone in a negative way. And again, this isn't based on data. This isn't based on scientific research. No, bills like this get put in because of fucking ideology. That's it. It's warped warped political ideology. Note that it also prevents institutions of higher education from providing instruction on gender-affirming care. This means that people who are trying to become doctors right now would not receive training on how to do this in school. And if no doctor is receiving training on how to give gender-affirming care to people who need it in school, where are they going to learn it? They might learn it in their residency, but what happens when the majority of doctors who are at any particular institution have never been trained on this, because the ones who have been trained on this have aged out or moved on? When, or, you know, in Marjorie Taylor Greene's favorite version of this, deported. This creates an environment where gender-affirming care gets rolled back several fucking decades. Because now we've got to get new students in who can't afford their medical, licensing anyway. They can't afford all of the studies that they have to do for this in the first place. Now we have them not receiving this information, not passing it on to new people when they get through their residency, and it creates a cycle of abuse. But I'm fairly certain, knowing what I do about Marjorie, the cycle is a feature, not a bug. A furry gamer, thank you very much for redeeming your points for an owl. Owl. Tasha says, doctors are required to do continuing education, but if no one is qualified to teach trans care for continuing education, and it's already considered niche care, yeah. Bingo. Greene's bill has 14 Republicans co-sponsors. I'm not going to list them all. They're right here. If you want to screenshot it, you can. But of course, we have Diddler Gates here. And we have Lauren Boebert. Of course we do. Why wouldn't we? House Republican leaders have started to lean into culture war fights regarding transgender individuals, with House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy pledging to bring up a bill that prohibits transgender athletes from competing in women's sports. And if Republicans win the House majority, that's going to be where they go. Greene on Friday tweeted that two Republican United States Senate candidates, J.D. Vance of Ohio and Blake Masters of Arizona, have promised to support her bill if they are elected. Gender-affirming care for teens being a Class C felony for anybody in the United States, like across the entire nation. Tucker Carlson, most watched news anchor entertainment guy, saying that he will pressure every Republican that he can find to join. Whether or not something like this passes in the next 2 years, it doesn't matter. What this is a frog in boiling water scenario. The idea is to keep introducing these bills, normalize the idea that this is the Republican stance in the culture war. It has to be the Republican stance in the culture war. And then to win the culture war, you fuck over trans people. The legislation being introduced nationally means that even if it fails, this will continue to be put through in revision after revision after revision. And it has, at time of making this video, 14 co-sponsors. That's not small. That's not small. Also, note that every other time that a bill like this has been introduced, it's been introduced within the confines of the state it originated from. This is not that. This is not originating within the confines of the state anymore. This is now being proposed nationally. That's another ticker here. That is another bit of information that is new where this is concerned. And we can even look at Marjorie's Twitter. It also blocks all taxpayer-funded... It also blocks all taxpayer funding for these barbaric procedures, bans colleges from teaching it, and prohibits foreign aliens who commit these appalling acts from entering into the United States. Note the language. You need to also have that little bit of racism in there too, because if you don't sprinkle it in there, well, how will your constituents know that you're just as racist as she is? And note, this is part of a plan to make things get much, much worse for trans people in the coming years. And I'm not saying that because I'm pulling something out of my ass. I'm saying that because I'm watching the frog boil in the water. This is why it is so important to vote in your primary election and your general election, to get people who do stuff like this out of politics. But more importantly, it's not just about getting them out once they have their seats. It's about preventing people like this from getting seats in the first place. Marjorie Taylor Greene was a niche micro person before she got her seat in the House. But now that she has had 2 years in the House of Representatives to run around and do the shit that she's been doing, guess what? Now, Marjorie Taylor Greene is a household name for a lot of people, when she wasn't back in her standing QAnon days. Endorsements from people like Donald Trump and being pushed forward by the Republican legislation, and then using that platform to shift the Overton window further and further into extremism. That's why getting people like this out of politics is important. And you get them out of politics by voting. And you increase the chances of getting them out of politics by talking about things like this with your friends, with people around you who are also planning on going and voting. Getting these people out. Because, of course, we need a whole lot of stuff to deal with culture war nonsense, because it's a giant, vague, vacuous term that can mean anything and nothing all at the same time. But when actual bills are being put forward, it goes from the culture war shit of the internet into affecting real people in their real lives in the here and now. Yeah, lives literally depend on countering bills like this. And will this bill go through? Probably not. Not in its first iteration, anyway. Give it time. Being proposed at a national level means it's becoming part of the national conversation. And again, it's getting the endorsements of people like Tucker Carlson, who, even if he were shown data that showed 110% that he were incorrect on everything he would say, he would continue to say it because that's what makes him money. If I say something incorrect on here, somebody from my audience lambasts me in the chat, and I have to make an edit in the video. Or I get corrected in the comment section, and I have to make an addendum in the actual comment area. Or, sometimes even worse, take the video down and re-upload it with corrected information. People like Tucker, selling lies is their gig. It's what they do. And no matter how easy it is to fact check them and show that they're drifting into massive hyperbole, it doesn't change anything. They're still going to continue to do it because that's what makes them money. That's what makes money for Marjorie Greene as well. Being an enemy to minority groups is her shtick. And that's not going to change. Remember when she had her whole little fiasco going in front of the Holocaust Museum and going, I've said some bad things about this in the past, but nothing compares to the magnitude of the Holocaust, and I am so sorry for everything that I have ever said and done. Remember when she did that and then she started saying all the same shit she's been doing afterwards? And yeah, I know, Anubian. I know it's more than this. I know that the idea is to take all healthcare and throw it in the dumpster and leave it only up to private institutions. Republicans have made no bones about that for the last few decades. The idea of publicly funded healthcare is terrifying to them because a lot of their money comes from either oil or insurance lobbies. So I don't know what to tell you other than A, follow where the money goes, and B, come on, guys. Don't sit here in doomerism and think that nothing can change if you don't do anything, or if you do something. Going out, voting, talking with people you care about things in politics that will, in fact, hurt you, that will affect you. That's important. So please, go do something about this. The general election is coming up. At the very least, the election to figure out who we're keeping in the House and Senate is coming up. Can we all go out and do something, please? Can we all go out and go make sure that we're not voting for people like this? Please? That would be incredibly helpful. Thank you. So I wish I could do something. Nishi, you can vote. That's the thing. Voting doesn't have absolute power in the United States because we have a representative democracy as opposed to a direct democracy, but it still has a lot of power. One vote isn't enough. But not doing that one vote creates a problem. It creates a domino effect of people not doing their one vote. I saw the numbers for Marjorie in my district. They were terrifying. I am hoping that those numbers will reverse when things go on. But we'll see. As always, everyone, let me know what you think in the comment section below and insert end of video tagline here.